There is a question at the center of everything happening in this conflict right now. And it is a question the official briefings coming out of Washington are going out of their way not to answer directly. American warships are burning in the Persian Gulf. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, bombers. One after another, they are taking hits with a level of precision that has stunned military analysts on both sides of this argument. And now, even the most loyal voices in American media can no longer pretend that nothing is happening. The damage is real. It is documented, and it is being confirmed by sources that cannot simply be waved away as Iranian propaganda. So the real issue now is no longer whether something serious has happened. It is why Washington still seems determined not to say out loud what the world can already see. So the question is this: who told Iran where to aim? Because what we are watching is not lucky guesswork. It is not the product of Iranian surveillance capabilities alone. Iran has been under technological sanctions for decades. Its independent intelligence infrastructure, while significant, does not possess the kind of real-time satellite targeting data that would allow it to consistently hit the most sensitive and well-defended assets in the American naval fleet. Someone is providing that data. And today, we know who. Before we get into the details, and the details are significant, subscribe to From Report right now if you have not already. This is the story that defines what this conflict actually is, and we are covering every dimension of it live Monday through Friday. Hit that button, share this video, and let's get into it. The confirmation did not come from Russian state media. It did not come from Iranian military announcements. It came from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Associated Press, and Reuters simultaneously, citing multiple American intelligence officials with direct access to classified assessments. 3 officials with knowledge of the intelligence described the situation to the Washington Post in terms that were remarkably specific. Russia is sharing real-time satellite coordinates with Iran, precise locations of American warships in the Gulf, positions of aircraft stationed at coalition bases across the region, priority target rankings, which installations to hit first, which assets to neutralize, and what equipment to use against each target. The intelligence being passed from Moscow to Tehran is described by American officials themselves using a single word: exquisite. That word matters. Exquisite does not mean adequate. It does not mean useful. It means precisely calibrated, unusually detailed, and operationally decisive. It means that when an Iranian drone or missile lifts off toward the Persian Gulf, it is not searching for a target. It already knows exactly where that target is, what its defensive posture looks like, and where its vulnerabilities are. That intelligence is coming from Russian military satellites and surveillance systems, technology that Iran, because of decades of Western sanctions, simply does not possess independently. The conflict that began with the United States and Israel striking Iran has now transformed into something categorically different. What we are watching is a direct proxy confrontation between 2 nuclear-armed powers. Russia is not firing missiles at American ships, but Russian intelligence is directing Iranian missiles to American ships. The distinction is legally and diplomatically significant. The operational effect is identical. To understand why Russia made this decision, you need to understand what Russia has been saying for the past 5 years, because the symmetry here is so precise that it cannot be accidental. Throughout the Ukraine conflict, Russia's most consistent and loudest complaint was this: Ukrainian forces are hitting targets inside Russian territory using coordinates provided by NATO. Moscow argued repeatedly that if Western intelligence agencies are feeding targeting data to Ukrainian missiles and drones striking Russian soil, then NATO is not a passive supporter of Ukraine. It is an active participant in the war against Russia. That argument was largely dismissed or minimized in Western capitals. The official position was that providing targeting data is not the same as pulling the trigger, and therefore does not constitute direct military involvement. Russia has now applied that exact logic in the other direction. They are providing Iran with targeting data for strikes against American military assets. They are not firing the weapons. Iran is. By the standard that Washington established in Ukraine, Russia is simply providing intelligence support to a partner nation defending itself against aggression. Moscow has taken America's own argument, turned it around, and is now using it to justify doing to the United States Navy in the Persian Gulf precisely what Washington did to the Russian military in Ukraine. The person who could most clearly articulate this equivalence, and therefore most credibly challenge Russia's behavior, is Donald Trump, which is precisely why the question was asked directly. A reporter from Fox News, not a hostile outlet by any measure, asked Trump point blank in a press conference whether he was aware that Russia was providing Iran with the coordinates being used to attack American military assets. Trump's response was to call it a stupid question and pivot immediately to discussing college athletes. The most powerful military commander on Earth asked whether a nuclear power is actively helping an adversary destroy his country's naval fleet, changed the subject. That reaction tells you everything about the impossible position Washington now finds itself in. The White House press secretary was asked the same question separately and responded that it frankly does not matter. Let that response be examined with the seriousness it deserves. American warships have been struck, a destroyer has been put out of commission, a bomber has been taken out of action, the USS Abraham Lincoln absorbed what Trump himself confirmed was a salvo of 101 missiles. The American military base in Bahrain, which existed, has been effectively destroyed. And the official position of the administration is that the source of the targeting intelligence used to achieve all of this does not matter. The reason for this position is not difficult to understand, even if it is difficult to accept. Publicly condemning Russia for providing Iran with targeting coordinates would require Washington to acknowledge the direct parallel with what it did in Ukraine. It would force a confrontation with Moscow at a moment when the United States is already stretched across two major conflict theaters and watching its regional coalition in the Middle East collapse country by country. And it would require Trump, who has spent years cultivating a particular relationship with Vladimir Putin, to stand up and say directly that Russia is killing American sailors. He is not going to do that. The press secretary is not going to do that. And so the official position is that it does not matter, even as the ships burn. One Republican Congressman, Don Bacon, went so far as to say publicly that most Americans consider this irrelevant. The official posture of the ruling party is that Russian intelligence directing missiles at American naval vessels in the Persian Gulf is irrelevant. That is where American political discourse is at the moment, and it is worth sitting with that for a moment before moving on. Now let's look at Russia's strategic calculation, because this decision did not come from emotion or impulse. It came from a cold assessment of what Russia cannot afford to lose. The survival of the Iranian regime is, from Moscow's perspective, a non-negotiable strategic interest. And the reasoning is straightforward. If the United States defeats Iran militarily and achieves its objectives in the region, the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil supply moves, and through which approximately 80% of China's oil imports pass, would effectively come under American control. That outcome would give Washington a chokehold over the energy supply of both Russia's most important economic partner and the most significant challenger to American global dominance. Neither Moscow nor Beijing can permit that outcome. The stakes are too high and the implications too permanent. Russia also has a more immediate bilateral interest. Iran and Russia signed military cooperation agreements worth approximately $590 million that included air defense systems capable of intercepting advanced aircraft and cruise missiles. The activation of that partnership in real combat conditions is not just a favor to Iran, it is a field test of Russian military technology against the most sophisticated Western hardware and operations. Every Iranian intercept of an American missile, every drone that survives American air defenses, every ship that absorbs a hit, all of it generates intelligence data that Russia's military engineers are studying in real time. This conflict is the most comprehensive live evaluation of Russian versus American military technology since the Cold War, and Russia is conducting it without putting a single soldier in the field. Beyond the hardware, there is the geography. Russia, after the collapse of its position in Syria, has been working to rebuild its influence in the Middle East. Losing Iran would not just mean losing an ally. It would mean losing the primary vehicle through which Russia projects power and relevance in the region. For the Kremlin, this is existential in the strategic sense, which is why Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, declined to comment on the intelligence sharing reports while Putin simultaneously activated his telephone diplomacy with the UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar. That juxtaposition is deliberate and revealing. Russia is publicly positioning itself as a potential stabilizing force, calling for ceasefire arrangements in the Gulf, while privately enabling the attacks that make a ceasefire necessary. It is a play that serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It keeps Iran in the fight. It drives a wedge between Washington and its Gulf partners. And it positions Moscow as an indispensable actor in any eventual resolution. Iran's response to Putin's diplomatic outreach was equally calculated. Tehran signaled willingness to halt attacks on other Arab states with one condition: those states must stop allowing American forces to use their territory and airspace to conduct operations against Iran. If the bases on their soil are used to strike Iran, Iran reserves the right to strike back, regardless of where those bases are located. That condition is not unreasonable from Iran's strategic perspective. It is also impossible for Washington to accept, because accepting it would mean asking Gulf states to effectively expel American forces, which is precisely what Iran has wanted since before this conflict began. The condition is designed to be a wedge. Either the Gulf states comply and America loses its regional basing, or they refuse and Iran continues striking their infrastructure. Both outcomes serve Tehran's objectives. And this is where Putin's role becomes most significant. By positioning Russia as the broker of a Gulf ceasefire arrangement, Moscow gains diplomatic legitimacy in a theater where it had been largely absent since the Syria situation evolved. It gets a seat at the table where the post-war order of the Middle East will eventually be negotiated. And it achieves all of this while its intelligence services continue guiding Iranian missiles toward American ships. Let's now bring China into the picture, because Beijing's role in this conflict is being systematically underreported, and it is essential to understanding the full architecture of what Washington is facing. China is maintaining a deliberately low profile. There are no dramatic announcements, no military deployments, no public statements that could be construed as direct involvement. What China is doing instead is economic. Beijing continues purchasing Russian oil and Iranian oil at scale, using local currencies in bilateral trade arrangements that completely bypass the dollar. The financial infrastructure that makes this possible, the same infrastructure that threatens the petrodollar system we covered in a previous transmission, is already operational and handling significant transaction volume. More critically, for the military dimension, China is the source of the microelectronics that go into Iranian drones. The Shahed series drones that have become the most feared and most discussed weapon system in this conflict are manufactured using Chinese source components. Without Chinese microelectronics, Iran's drone production would slow dramatically. With them, the production line keeps running and the stockpiles keep growing. China is not firing drones at American ships, but Chinese components are in every drone that is. The United States is now in a position where it is simultaneously trying to figure out how to counter Iranian drones and has reportedly turned to Ukraine for advice, given that Ukrainian forces have the most extensive real-world experience dealing with the same drone systems that Russia deployed there. The geopolitical circularity of that situation is almost too perfect. America is asking the country it armed against Russia how to counter the weapons Russia helped develop and China helped build, now being used by Iran against American ships. Every thread in this conflict leads back to the same set of interdependencies that Washington spent years pretending did not exist. Now let's address the ground invasion question, because it is no longer theoretical, and the implications of it going forward are severe. Reports from NBC and other regional outlets indicate that Trump has privately expressed interest in deploying ground troops inside Iranian territory for what are being described as strategically specific missions. The context for this is the apparent failure of the Kurdish destabilization strategy, the plan to use Kurdish forces to create internal instability within Iran, fracture its territorial cohesion, and generate the kind of internal pressure that might force regime change from within. That plan has not worked. 3 separate attempts to activate it have reportedly failed. And when the air campaign strategy is not producing the desired results, and the proxy destabilization strategy has failed, the pressure to consider a ground option increases. No order has been signed. That needs to be stated clearly. But the fact that senior American officials are confirming that the option is being discussed, that it is on the table, that it is being considered seriously, that is itself a significant escalation in the rhetorical and planning environment. Because a ground deployment into Iran would not be a surgical operation. It would be an invasion of a country of 90 million people with a deeply motivated military, terrain that is extraordinarily difficult for mechanized forces, and a population that has spent 40 years being told that American forces represent an existential threat to their nation and their way of life. The body bag calculus alone should give Washington pause. Air campaigns are politically sustainable as long as the casualties are primarily on the other side. The moment American soldiers start coming home in flag-draped coffins from Iranian soil, the domestic political equation changes completely and irreversibly. Trump has midterm elections approaching. Fuel prices are already up 30%. Public support for this war was never strong. A ground invasion that produces American casualties at scale would not just end the war politically, it could end the administration. There is one more dimension to examine before we close, and it connects everything we have covered today to the broader trajectory of this conflict. Ukraine is now on both sides of this war simultaneously. Ukrainian soldiers are reportedly deployed in the Middle East, advising American forces on drone countermeasures, drawing on their experience facing Russian-supplied Iranian drones on their own territory. And on the other side of the ledger, Russia is advising Iran and providing targeting data that is being used to destroy American military assets. The war in Ukraine and the war against Iran are not separate conflicts. They are nodes in the same network, connected by technology, by intelligence sharing, by proxy relationships, and by the strategic calculations of powers that have concluded their interests are best served by ensuring that the United States does not emerge from either theater with its military credibility intact. Every Iranian missile that strikes an American vessel using Russian coordinates is a missile that Russia did not have to fire itself. The cost to Moscow is the transmission of a satellite coordinate. The benefit is a degraded American naval presence, an exhausted American military, a fractured American alliance structure, and a global audience. Watching American military power absorb losses it is not willing to publicly acknowledge. That is extraordinary strategic value at essentially zero direct military risk. The United States began this conflict demanding Iran's unconditional surrender. Weeks later, its ships are operating in the Persian Gulf, knowing that Russia has already given Iran their positions. The naval dominance that American power projection has depended on for decades is being contested in real time. And the official response from Washington is that it does not matter. It matters. It matters enormously. And we are going to keep telling you exactly how much it matters every single day on From Report. Subscribe to this channel now. Share this video with everyone in your network who is trying to understand the full scope of what is happening, and join us live Monday through Friday. The official version of this war is getting harder to maintain with every ship that takes a hit. We will give you the real version. We will see you in the next